The smell hit first. Burned cedar, melted velvet, old paper curling into black ash inside the fireplace my mother picked before she died. I stood frozen in the doorway while my stepmother smiled beside the flames, holding an empty bottle of wine like she'd just finished celebrating something sacred. That dusty box was disgusting, she said. I finally cleaned this house. My chest tightened so hard I thought I might collapse beside the dining table. The jewelry box had belonged to my mother for 30 years. She kept it locked in her closet beside handwritten birthday cards, hospital bracelets, and every tiny piece of our life before cancer hollowed her out. I'm Vanessa Mercer, 34, estate attorney, only child. And in that moment, I watched the last physical thing my mother ever touched disappear into smoke while my father sat silently on the couch pretending not to notice. I should have screamed. Instead, I walked closer to the fire. My stepmother mistook my silence for weakness. She leaned toward me with that smug little smile and whispered, "Now, maybe you'll finally stop clinging to dead things." I looked directly at the burning ashes, then quietly asked, "Did you open the hidden compartment before you burned it?" Her smile disappeared so fast it almost looked painful. "The what?" she asked. I didn't answer immediately. I just crouched near the fireplace and used the iron poker to shift the collapsing wood carefully apart. Beneath the glowing embers sat twisted metal hinges and blackened scraps of paper floating upward like dead insects. My father finally looked up from the television. "Vanessa," he muttered nervously. "Don't start." "Start?" My pulse hammered so violently I could barely hear him. My mother spent 6 months preparing that box before she died. 6 months hiding documents where nobody would think to search. Especially Rebecca. My stepmother crossed her arms tightly. "If you're trying to scare me, grow up." I stood slowly and brushed ash from my hands. The hidden compartment held original trust paperwork tied to Dad's company shares, I said calmly. Without those documents, ownership transfers freeze automatically during legal review. My father sat upright instantly. Rebecca blinked twice. "What are you talking about?" I watched panic begin crawling across her face for the first time since she married into our family. Then I delivered the part my mother specifically told me never to reveal unless absolutely necessary. The review includes every financial decision made after my mother died. Rebecca laughed too loudly. It sounded forced, brittle. "You're bluffing," she said, grabbing her wine glass again. "Paper copies exist. Lawyers keep records of everything. Not these." I walked to the bookshelf beside the staircase and pulled open the narrow cabinet drawer underneath. My father watched me carefully now, tension hardening his face. Inside sat a plain white envelope, sealed, untouched for 4 years. My mother's handwriting covered the front in faded blue ink. "For Vanessa only if Rebecca ever touches the box." Rebecca stopped breathing for a second when she saw it. I opened the envelope carefully and removed a notarized letter folded beside a small silver key. My father stood immediately. "What the hell is that?" "The backup." My voice stayed steady, but inside, grief clawed through me all over again. My mother knew exactly who Rebecca was long before my father ever admitted it to himself. The letter explained everything. The trust, the shell accounts, the property restrictions, and one devastating clause attached to my father's company shares after my mother's death. If evidence of financial manipulation by any future spouse emerged, Rebecca would lose every legal claim tied to the estate permanently. Rebecca stared at me, then at the fire, and finally whispered something that made the entire room turn cold. "I already signed paperwork yesterday." My father's face drained completely. "What paperwork?" he asked. Rebecca looked cornered for the first time since entering our lives. Her confidence cracked around the edges as she backed toward the kitchen island, gripping the counter hard enough for her knuckles to pale. "It wasn't illegal," she said quickly. "You told me we needed liquidity." My stomach dropped. "What did you do?" I asked quietly. She looked directly at my father instead of me. "I used the lake house as collateral." The room went silent except for the soft popping sounds inside the fireplace. My mother's lake house. The one place she begged my father never to touch. My father staggered backward like someone had physically shoved him. "Rebecca, that property is protected under the trust." "I didn't know that," she snapped. "Your accountant said the transfer was clean." I felt something colder than anger settle into my chest. "What accountant?" Rebecca hesitated. "Too long." Then she whispered a name I hadn't heard since my mother's funeral. "Martin Keller." Every muscle in my body locked instantly. Martin wasn't just my father's former accountant. He was the man investigated years earlier for quietly moving dying clients' assets before probate finalized. My mother hated him, and suddenly, I understood why she hid those documents so carefully before she died. I excused myself before either of them noticed my hands shaking. Not from fear, from memory. I locked myself inside my old bedroom upstairs and stared at the framed photo beside the bed. My mother sat on the lake house dock wearing that oversized gray sweater she refused to throw away, smiling like she already knew time was running out. Then her voice replayed clearly inside my head. "If Martin Keller ever comes back around your father, protect yourself first." At 19, I thought she sounded paranoid. At 34, I finally understood she was preparing me for this exact moment. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. I answered carefully. "Miss Mercer?" a man asked quietly. "This is Daniel Reeves from Hawthorne National Bank. We received an emergency freeze request connected to your mother's trust less than 20 minutes ago." I straightened instantly. What triggered it? A pause. Then, an attempted transfer involving the lake house and 3 corporate holding accounts. My heartbeat slowed instead of rising. That meant my mother's safeguards were still active. "Who submitted the transfer?" I asked. Daniel lowered his voice. "The authorization included your father's signature, but the digital verification came from Rebecca's personal device." Downstairs, I suddenly heard my father shouting for the first time all night. By the time I reached the bottom of the stairs, Rebecca was crying. Not softly, violently. Mascara streaked down her cheeks, while my father stood near the kitchen table holding a stack of printed bank records with trembling hands. "You forged timestamps?" he asked her. "I was trying to help us," she shouted back. "You said the company was bleeding money." My father looked shattered, older somehow. For years, he ignored every warning my mother ever gave him because Rebecca made him feel young after grief hollowed him out. Watching reality finally break through his denial felt almost cruel. Almost. I walked calmly toward the table. "Martin used the holding accounts to bypass trust review," I said. "But Mom anticipated that years ago." Rebecca stared at me through tears. "Stop talking like she planned this." "She did." I slid my mother's notarized letter across the table. My father read silently while Rebecca tried reading his expression instead of the page. Then his face collapsed completely. "What is it?" Rebecca whispered. He looked at her like he'd never truly seen her before. "Elaine transferred permanent control of the estate to Vanessa before she died." Rebecca's breathing turned uneven. "That's impossible. It became permanent the moment you interfered with protected trust assets." Rebecca stepped backwards slowly. Then she asked the question that confirmed everything for me. "What happens to me now?" My father couldn't answer her. He just sat there staring at the paperwork while 20 years of bad decisions settled onto his shoulders all at once. I answered instead. "The fraud investigation starts Monday." Rebecca's eyes widened instantly. "Fraud?" Hawthorne Bank already flagged the transfers. Once the trust freeze activates, auditors examine every financial movement connected to protected assets. She shook her head violently. "No. No, I didn't steal anything." "You attempted to leverage property you legally couldn't touch," I said quietly, "using falsified authorization tied to a man already investigated for probate manipulation." Rebecca looked toward my father desperately. "Tell her this is insane." But he stayed silent. That silence hurt her more than anything I could have said. She suddenly grabbed her purse from the counter and rushed toward the front door. My father stood halfway, instinctively wanting to stop her, but I gently placed my hand on his arm. "Don't." Rebecca opened the door with shaking hands, then froze completely. 2 people stood outside beneath the porch light. Daniel Reeves from Hawthorne National Bank, and beside him, A woman carrying a leather case stamped with the State Financial Crimes Division seal. Rebecca turned slowly toward me, pale with terror. I held my mother's silver key tightly in my palm and finally said the words I'd buried for years. She knew exactly who you were. Rebecca left our house before sunrise carrying 2 suitcases and whatever remained of her pride. The investigation moved faster than anyone expected. Martin Keller accepted a settlement agreement within 3 weeks after forensic accountants uncovered multiple illegal transfers connected to vulnerable estates. Rebecca avoided prison only because investigators proved Martin manipulated most of the paperwork himself. But she still lost everything she tried grabbing. The lake house stayed protected. The company survived restructuring. And every asset my mother spent her final months safeguarding remained untouched. My father changed quietly after that night. Not dramatically, realistically. He stopped pretending grief had made him helpless. He started visiting the lake house alone every Sunday morning, carrying fresh flowers and sitting on the dock for hours without speaking. One evening, he handed me my mother's restored jewelry box after conservation specialists repaired the fire damage. I should have listened to her, he whispered. I traced the dark burn marks along the cedar lid carefully. They never disappeared completely. Neither did the damage Rebecca caused. But somehow, neither did my mother. Months later, I placed the box inside my office beside framed photos of her smiling beside the water she loved most. Protected, just like she planned.